Sir Karthikeyan Nachiyappan. He is an architect who has graduated from the Architectural Association. His research has been published in many esteemed journals, such as the Indian Concrete Journal. He is the founder and director of Studio of Architectural Urbanism, an art and architecture consultancy focusing on research and development of housing projects in Ooty and in Chennai. His research interests include low-cost housing, architectural space making, informality and slums, inequalities in planning, and policies and urban design.
Welcome to UGC lecture series on architecture, urban housing, unit number 5, lecture number 2. So, this final chapter concludes the housing process with limiting its topic to housing management, community participation, what are the environmental aspects that has to be considered in housing, and the housing technology. So, housing management is to define on what kinds of methodologies you could adopt in terms of management of the housing. So, in previous chapters we had looked at the housing process as an entire spectrum dealing with a feasibility study, a case study, and how the design could come up. Now, in this we are going to look at a finished project, how to manage it and what are the different process of managing those. So, to take a look at approaches to the concept of management role in housing has 3 different stages or 3 different types. One would be the contractual approach. Here the process is very simple, where the tenant and the landlord is involved. A contract is being signed between these two in terms of an agreement, and the contract form of relationship between the landlord and the tenant is exposing different rights and duties of both the owner and the tenant. Rights to the tenant, such as right to security of tenure, is also included. The next way of management includes a social concept, where this involves different social participants, community organizers to get involved themselves and push people into a more sociable activity, and this involves providing advice to them, and reunification of management with social work is also done, and different welfare activities are carried out in terms of management of housing. And the third form is self-tenant management, where each one of us take responsibility for our own housing, and we say that this abolishes landlord role, attempt to encourage self-help and mutual aid when individual users come up themselves in terms of managing, and there could be a different methodology adopted, and every house could be managed in a different way, and a different style of management could also get evolved. Now, looking at some of the key factors that affect the housing development, especially in developing countries, one would be the fragmented housing policies and administrative systems. So, all these points which you look at has been already studied in the previous chapters. Fragmented housing policies address how unclear we are about in framing the housing rules to set to the targeted housing demand, lack of capacity, non-payment of housing loans, because in developing countries people take loan and the assurance of repaying the loans to the bank or the lending institutions is very minimal. So, non-payment of loans retard an economy and retard in turn the provision of housing in future. Inappropriate standards of housing, inexperienced housing consumers, because people who are targeted might not know how to use that housing as a commodity or as a social unit for living. Looking at a housing scenario in India for the past 10 years or 1 decade, there has been an incremental growth from 286.1 million that has been grown to around 360 million, and it also says that more than 50% in India would live in an urbanized condition by 2020. So, looking at scenario in one position and taking the problems on another side, you have a lot of problems which includes lack of equitable supply of land. There is a lot of inequality in how the land as a target commodity or a house as a commodity is being given to different users, lack of shelter, services at an affordable price, and the depletion of resources on another hand plays a very important role. Land as a resource is not being utilized properly and channelized in a correct way to develop housing projects. This image clearly shows what kind of existing condition of house we live in, and especially most of our neighbors live in. So, you could see a series of high rises or say a medium density housing, and that are completely encircled with these lot of tin sheet houses in between. So, this is the scenario of slums or squatter settlements in India. And for us to remember, 1 billion people live in inadequate housing, which means almost 1/6 to 1/7 of the entire population of the world lives in an inadequate housing situation, and out of which half of those are our neighbors living in the South Asian Pacific region, that includes India as well. And what does the government do in terms of achieving this? So, government has set some objectives through different schemes and services that relate to develop templates worth 1 lakh rupee, and to look at alternative building techniques, that is to develop research methodologies and technologies to improve housing conditions, providing a house having a minimum plinth area of 25 square meters. Planning of projects of low rise high density basis, which does not happen because most of the housing that are targeted to the user are high rise buildings because of lack of land. Achieving economy to scale, that is 2000 to 3000 houses per place is the most concentration of housing projects. Using alternate or local building materials, utilization of environment friendly materials. So, all these are the objectives that have been laid out by the government, but which are still remaining in an infant stage to cross over, and which has led to one different planning of a typology, which shows a proper living unit with a private bedroom, a kitchen and a water closet with a basic facility and an entrance through the service core, which is having, this is done under the integrated housing and slum development program, where a small backyard is given for every house, and this works out to be to the cost of 1 lakh and 67 rupees. So, this 1 lakh objective has been achieved, but still it cannot be mass house, or it cannot be a customized unit for which could be replicated in different parts of different urban conditions. Now, looking at a cluster. So, moving down to another scale which is done in Varda. So, here the planning is very simple. You have a central road and two different organization of spaces happen. So, this central road leads to two different cluster units, and all of this lead to housing units which are being clustered in different spaces, and organization of secondary green spaces around the site provide the community a relief space. So, in this planning you could see maximum accessibility with minimum road area, which means that there is a minimum road that connects a minimum motor road that connects the entire community. Backyard to all units have been achieved, a central green space that is being evolved around every space, and a play area for the tiny lots are also being, like a small playground is being given. So, this at least ensures a level of community facility within, and it gives a sense of identity in community for these low income housing projects. One can ask, housing related to health, how can it be related? So, looking at the back, a flip part of it, a better ventilation improves a better air quality within. It ensures a better quality of air that is coming through in, which improves the health, a better roofing, better flooring and improved water and sanitation. So, all these put together, a decent housing reduces the level of infections and the kind of safety. So, here provision of housing with a better quality and better security ensures good health to people, which in turn helps in a pleasant living condition. So, it is especially among the poorest people. Now, moving on to next part of housing and education. So, when the people have a healthy living, they could invest something, and there is one statement which says that people living in the poorer condition or anyone affords almost 50% or invest 50% of their income in housing condition. Now, when housing and health has been improved, the remaining proportion of the income could be put into education, where they can have a financial security in a later stage that could generate an employment opportunity. So, which simply says a clean, dry place, a well lit place creates less illness, so that there is a financial security and there is a clear path to employment and a brighter future. So, housing is always, as a process, is just not providing a house as such or providing shelter, it relates to various other aspects that involve in it. So, what can one or communities get from one house? So, imagine a house is just not a commodity which is being placed on a ground, but on a scaling up process it is a community. Now, when there is a better health, better education, better economic security, there is a sense of securities that is being achieved. So, between a group of house, a common courtyard ensures safety and security. Good invigilation could be done from one house to the another, and there could be small economic security through provision of smaller micro wages within, and there could also be a community empowerment done by providing social stability, safety and cultural identity. So, when every house is being designed beyond thinking of what a small shelter is, it grows organically. And this process ends up in something called as community participation, which means in simple words it is in our hands. So, a community participation is a very simple process of involving the community to participate in the design, build and execution of a project. So, as the image clearly shows, there is a group of people, that is a community involved in terms of education, empowerment before even the design and the build option does. So, this involves various stakeholders, local community authorities, governments and the public involved, along with architects and engineers who play a technical role in provision of housing. The element framework is very simple, which includes the housing needs, resources, that is the land. Land is already available, because when you this community participation would mostly be done in an in situ rehabilitation, which means that land is already available, and a regulatory framework which is done by the government, and this eventually leads to the development of programs for the community, where keeping the public participation as a major framework. People's participation stages are in different ways, where it starts with participation, social learning, self-reliance, capacity building and empowerment sustainability. So, people are just not involved in learning something, but they learn techniques to build, they learn to empower themselves, they learn to be independent on their own, and they also participate in developing their own communities as well. So, significance of the public participation, and it is an essential part of human growth, which promotes self confidence in each one of them, and along with this vocational training combined gives a more stronger sense of security to the neighborhood. It starts with elderly wisdom words, where a sense of the location history is taken. So, a group of people interact with the old age people in that particular, or people who have lived for more than 50 years in that particular area, to gather details on when was the settlement formed, how far are they coming from, why had they come from one particular location to another location. So, all these smaller details have been collected to gather the data on historical statistics related to that settlement. Slowly, it moves on to community participation, which involves thinking at the first process, that moves on to planning, decision making, implementation and evaluation. So, community participation does not only relate to the design of it, but also the implementation and evaluation stage would be gone. So, then once these strategies and the framework have been done, to take it to the further stage, you need to discuss with the municipal officers. So, once every data is gathered, you need to seek permission to the local authorities whether to proceed with it or not, and the government support is always essential in a community participation. And there are local program motivators who motivate the community to design and build. Now, these local program motivators are being trained on another scale by the national program training, and these national program motivators are in turn developed or trained by an international facilitator. So, this goes as a cycle on discussing and helping people to improve what their community is and improve the techniques to do it. So, next, motivating the community happens. All people from the neighborhood come and cluster into one point, like a small, this happens in public schools, government schools, and this happens in open spaces in and around the community. Some ways and forms of community participation includes consultation, financial contribution, self-help projects, indigenous development, mass action, collective commitment, autonomous development and approaches to self-sufficiency. Here, most of it relates to what we call as self-independent construction of projects, and the people could either consult in terms of designing a project, they could build their own projects, or they could take self mutual aid to develop a particular house. Then training sessions by non-governmental organization and local program motivators happen in classrooms and in different spaces around the community, where they gather some, and mostly women are targeted for here, so that they feel more responsible for the community as such. The next crucial stage is the sources of financing. How does you have a community and you have things in terms of paper to be developed as in practical project. Now, where does the source of fund come from? Of course, central government, the government initiatives gives or pools in fund for this, but the other ways of doing it is the part of beneficiaries workmanship. So, a part of their income would be taken into the form of community funding, membership fees will be collected, that will be a part of their income which will be put as a membership fee, establishment fee for the community, investment revenues if someone is willing to do it, and some public or private investor could do it, and governmental loans could help. So, all these 5 put together helps in financing these schemes. Even though there is a lot of say funds coming from abroad and different organizations help financially, but these are the sources of income to for the growth of the communities, and self help in construction next take place. So, once all these motivation happens, these people are trained to build their own house. So, the carpentry work, the wooden, plumbing, joinery, the RCC construction, brick infilling, preparation of window frames. So, the technical details involved in construction of the houses are taught to the people, and individually people work within the site to develop their own housing models. And finally, training to build. So, there is a common space that is being adopted where individual people are able to visualize their new houses. So, it will be done through smaller models which you could see over here, and these models would be built for them to visualize how the 3-dimensional form of the environment would be. And all these put together, the community gets enriched, empowered to build their new household. So, community participation is a very beneficial part in everyone's livelihood, especially for the low income, and when you consider these in situ rehabilitation. Now, moving on to the next concept of environmental aspects in housing, this more talks about how in a housing process we could avoid natural hazards or we could not disturb the environment. The first key factor which we would deal with is the buffer zone, where it could be a row of trees, as you could see, a row of trees that is planted just outside the boundary of the site, and this planting of trees could extend to 200 to 400 meters in width along the boundary of the site. So, what could be done just with the row of trees over here? Does it make any difference? Yes, of course. This acts as a natural filter. So, buffer zones actually prevents noise pollution, prevents air pollution. So, this acts, these row of trees or avenue of trees acts as the visually pleasing environment. It also screens the polluted air that comes into your site and filters the noise pollution. Buffer zones to be planted along the direction of wind to avoid noise and air pollution. Another element which could be used is colonnades along with roads, streets and paths. So, every avenue that is being created with the sidewalks like this, again a row of streets, creates a sense of social environment where you could have street furnitures, you could have a row of trees, which makes it aesthetically pleasing. It has a good impact on what the social status of the project is about. It gives a green lighting effect, a green mood, a more sustainable or a greener version of the environment is taken into consideration, and it is also considered important for shade. So, shade. So, apart from talking as just a noise or air pollution, environmental aspects also deals with aesthetics on how these functional elements could be used in an environment positive way. A recreational zone or open spaces. Every housing process needs a breathing space to work with. Breathing spaces are just not open spaces, but rather this gives an advantage of no scope of expansion in future. As says, these spaces might not actually be sold to the end users, but used as only common facility, because in any developing city where land is an important resource, people try to take up all the land to develop new building structures in it. So, when we build more and more buildings, what happens to our open space will be a major question mark. An overall area of 10% covered by housing schemes should be allowed for open spaces. If this is not allowed, the entire community does not, or so they will not be provided with a proper open space. If you look at these development examples, you could see ample of open space. So, this is a high density environment, but you could see the amount of green spaces. All these are avenue of trees, the buffers which we were talking about. So, the row of trees that are planted across the road acts as natural environmental buffers, and in other words, these open spaces or green lawns around the site acts as these 10% open spaces we are talking about. This refreshes the community, and other than that, a small community space itself is given in a housing layout. So, in a high density environments, these breathing spaces are much important to clutter out from the building forms which we see. The last part of it deals with housing technology. We could categorize simply into 3 different forms. One would be the conventional technology, industrialized technology and appropriate technology. Conventional is the normal way of a user sees it everywhere, RCC frame construction. It is a prevailing technique and it is slow and inefficient. And industrialized technology, this would be more in terms of a speedier construction, cutting down of cost, in situ fabrication, because of technology involved in it and industrialized machines and equipments involved in it, the efficiency is improved. And appropriate technology on another hand, as the image shows, is use of efficient natural resources on site, so that it increases the efficiency, it increases the productivity, and of course, the quality and the speed of construction is also done, because when you use the available resource within the site, you do not need to transport the materials from another site. So, that improves productivity as well. One example of housing technology and the new construction materials is ferrocement. This is highly advantageous because this material of ferrocement reduces the weight of this entire structure having no steel bars. So, there are much less steel bars or no steel bars are required for reinforcement, and it is much versatile and it has high strength quality. A layer of chicken mesh is surrounded with supporting small reinforcement bars, making the structure a much thin, a much elegant, much stronger, and more serviceability is more serviceability, and a dead load of it is much lesser than a heavy steel based or a reinforcement based construction. And these ferrocement bars are layered over a chicken mesh where the cement is poured on top of it, and the dead weight of it is much less to carry and precast things over here. So, ferrocement is much more speedier in construction. It does not require skilled labor. A normal labor could do it in a much conventional way, and these are being used in low income groups or say in rural areas to build water tanks and public toilets, and all these facilities are being done. Another new construction material is fly ash, which is being used as a residue obtained from the thermal power stations. It is used efficiently in terms of replacement of a cement. So, again this reduces, when you add fly ash to it, the amount of steel in the concrete number of steel in the reinforcement used would be much less. Again, the dead weight of the structure might become less. It can also be mixed with other ingredients of concrete. Laterite blocks, it is another natural material taken from laterite soil, and it is developed by the Structural Engineering Research Institute over here. And the best advantage over here is these blocks has a moisture absorption of less than 12%, which means that these blocks have good weathering characteristics and platerability. So, this materialistically has a visual quality attributed to it, and it also does not require any skilled labor to be used or employed for construction. And different ways of housing technology developed by Structural Engineering Research Institute, Chennai. So, these are hyperbolic paraboloid shell roofs, which is an unconventional way of developing housing strategies. So, these kinds of roof forms are visually and aesthetically pleasing, but not widely used for housing projects, but these could be used for much bigger spans. It could be enhanced in terms of having a columnless construction, and these roof structures and kinds can be visually appealing for a user as such. And this is not being done only by Structural Engineering Research Institute, but other institutes like Indian Institute of Technology, cement based organizations, and other non-profit organizations are working on structure based research to improve the efficiency of construction. Another way of dealing with the housing technology here is brick shell funicular roofing with flat bricks. So, as you see in the ceiling of such. So, this is very simple in terms of construction, having a brick of 3 inch with a concrete which is poured in, and these pointing done in lime soaking mortar. So, that the finish is much pleasant, the cost of construction is much less, there is a saving in steel and cement which would reduce the cost of construction, and it is more suitable for mass housing, because in a developing country we are looking more in terms of multiplying things. So, we are not looking for individual houses, even though this is visually pleasing, this is suitable for mass housing, speedier construction and good aesthetics. So, all these forms or characteristics of brick funicular shell roofs makes it an advantage for introducing this as a technology in further upgradation projects or further slum redevelopment projects. The last form of technology we are going to look at is modular construction and prefabrication. Modular is nothing but it is based on a particular module. So, every frame member has a particular proportion, say the size of it is x, and the entire module would be to the proportion of x. So, which means that it has greater efficiency in terms of variance, and the most advantages of the modular construction includes cost reduction through greater efficiency. It has less wastage because all these modules are already prefabricated. It is already done and in a industrialized way. Smaller number of standard types. This is a disadvantage which is expected because of modules you cannot have a limit. I mean, you can have only limited permutations of use, rather having different modules which are being done. Modular dimension is in multiples of basic modules, limitation of the variant and standardization of building components and structures. Prefabrication is still in infant stage. So, as we could see, prefabrication is nothing but it is a new technique which is dealing with off-site fabrication and putting or assembling things in it. So, it is a new technique and it is desirable for low income groups and development of slum settlements over here. Looking at India on one perspective where the housing demand is much high, and for a speedier construction and the target population where building 1 million houses is a challenge, prefabrication could be a solution for it, provided the technology support is more provided in terms of the government. It needs to be introduced wherever large number of houses are required to be built yearly or period of 5 to 10 years. And it is defined in a way that it is completely assembled and erected building of which different parts, as you could see over here, walls, doors, frames and everything is prefabricated separately and it is being assembled on site as a unit. So, the unit itself is assembled off site and it is being carried and placed on the original structure. So, prefabrication is much more, it has a lot of advantages in terms of speedier construction, achieving the deadline in a much more early stage, and the cost is much, I mean the logistics and everything would not add to the initial cost of mass housing. To summarize what we have looked at, so we have looked at different forms of housing management from contractual approach to self-tenant approach and different stages involved in community participation and what are all the environmental aspects and how these aspects of housing could be tackled. And finally, to conclude, we were looking at different housing technologies and the improvement in materials and different organizations researching on construction materials. Some questions to be thought upon. So, explain in detail the various stages and tasks in community participation, explain about housing management, the conventional appropriate technologies, industrial technology used in housing, the note on the plants and natural environments, that is talking about the environmental aspects could be more useful, some techniques developed by the Structural Engineering Research Institute, Chennai, and discuss in detail about some new materials in construction. Thank you.